My name is Odessa. I was 37 years old when I drove 2 hours up Highway 17 from Charleston, 4 days earlier than anybody expected me, and heard applause coming from my own front porch. My porch. My grandmother's magnolia. 40-some people in folding chairs on the grass she planted in 1961. And my little sister standing on the top step in a champagne-colored dress, holding up her left hand so everybody could see the ring. My grandmother's ring. The one I kept in a Sucret's tin on the shelf above the stove. Nobody turned around. That's the part I still think about. I had maybe 40 seconds standing at the end of that driveway with my keys in my hand and my hospital badge still clipped to my bag, 40 seconds of knowing something that not one person in that yard knew yet. That I was home, that I could see all of it, that I was already doing math. Calvin thought he knew exactly who he was dealing with. A steady woman, a tired woman. A woman who works nights and doesn't make scenes and cries in the car where nobody can hear it. He had no idea what was sitting in my mailbox. Before I take you through it, do me a favor and tell me in the comments where you're watching from today. I read them. And if this kind of story finds you where you live, go ahead and subscribe because the next one cuts even deeper. Let me back all the way up. I'm an ICU nurse. 14 years, most of them at Marsh Point Regional off Waters Avenue. Night shift, 312s, sometimes 4 when somebody calls out and nobody else will pick it up. The kind of nurse who keeps a bag of clean socks in her locker because families sleep in waiting rooms and nobody ever thinks about their feet. The kind who buys the decent coffee for the break room out of her own pocket in March and again in September, and never says a word about it. The kind of woman who fills the holes before anybody notices there was a hole. I want you to understand that about me, because everything that happened later happened because of it. In July, I picked up a 6-week crisis contract at a hospital in Charleston, Ashley Crossing. They were short 11 nurses in a 22-bed unit, and the money was good. $62 an hour, plus a stipend, and I had a roof over the kitchen that had been quietly rotting for 2 years. I told myself 6 weeks of somebody else's crisis would buy me a new roof and a little cushion. I signed on a Tuesday. The house is on Habersham Street. My grandmother Eunice bought it in 1959, with money she made pressing hair in her own front room and cleaning offices downtown at night, and she paid it off in 1981. And she died in it in her sleep at 84 with her reading glasses still on her chest. She left it to me. Not to my mother, who was already gone by then. Not to my sister, to me. Free and clear, no mortgage, no lien, nothing owed to anybody, the deed in a manila envelope in a safe deposit box at the credit union on Bull Street. She wrote a note and clipped it to the envelope. 4 words, keep the roof tight. My sister's name is Tessa. She's 6 years younger. When our mother Delphine died, I was 22 and Tessa was 16, and I did not go back to school that fall, and I have never once said that out loud to her, not one time, because you don't hand somebody a bill for something you gave freely. I signed her permission slips. I drove her to prom in a car with a bad alternator. I co-signed her first apartment and paid the last 2 months of it when she got laid off from the dental office. When she wanted to get her esthetician license, I paid the tuition in 3 installments and told her it was a birthday present so she wouldn't feel like she owed me. Calvin Rhodes came into my life 4 years ago at a cookout on Wilmington Island. He's 41. He calls himself a real estate consultant, which as far as I could ever determine means he had a folder of listings on his phone and a lot of opinions about interest rates. He moved into my grandmother's house 3 years and 2 months ago. He brought a duffel bag, a PlayStation, and a bottle of Crown he never opened. He never paid a dime toward that house. Not once. Not the water bill, not the property tax, not the pest guy who came every spring to deal with the termites that come for every old house in Savannah eventually. And I want to be honest with you here, because if I'm going to sit here and tell you what he did, I have to also tell you what I allowed. I told myself he was between things. I told myself the arrangement was temporary and that it would be small and mean of me to keep a ledger. 11 months ago, he asked me for $9,000 for a licensing bond. He had a whole explanation about it. Surety bonds, Georgia requirements, a broker in Pooler who was going to bring him on. He said it like a man who had rehearsed it in the shower. I moved the money from my savings on a Thursday morning before I went to bed, because I work nights and my mornings are everybody else's evenings, and I remember thinking that I would rather give it to him than watch him ask again. He never got a license. I never asked for the money back. That's on me. So, Charleston. I left on a Sunday in early September. Tessa came by the night before to get the spare key so she could water the ferns on the porch and bring in the mail, the same way she'd done a dozen times over the years. The same way I did for her when she went to Puerto Rico with her girlfriends. She hugged me in the driveway and told me to eat something besides vending machine crackers. And I laughed and said, I make no promises. 6 weeks, 12-hour nights in a unit where the ventilators were older than my career. I called my great-aunt Winnie twice a week. She's my grandmother's baby sister, 79. Living out at a place off Skidaway with a courtyard she calls the yard and a roommate she calls the situation. Her mind is sharper than mine. She asked me every single call, how are your kids doing? She means my patients. I never had children. My kids are in bed 4 and bed 9, and sometimes they die on me at 3 in the morning, and I chart it and go wash my hands and go into the next room and smile. That's the job. Aunt Winnie has known me 40 years, and she has never once called them anything else. I talked to Calvin most nights, short calls. He was distracted in a way I read as bored. I talked to Tessa less and less. Her texts got shorter. She stopped answering the sister group chat we have with our cousin in Atlanta. In week 4, she left a voice memo about a client with a chemical burn, and I listened to it 3 times because something in her voice was pitched wrong. Too bright, like she was performing being casual. And then I decided I was overtired, and I went to sleep. There were 3 things. I want to lay them out because people always ask how you don't see it. 1. In week 2, my neighbor Mrs. Petitjean, she's been across the street since Reagan, called me. She never calls. She wanted to know if I needed her to keep an eye on anything now that I'd moved on up to Charleston. I laughed and told her I'd be back before the pecans dropped. She got quiet. She said, all right, baby, and hung up. 2. My water bill in week 3 was $91. It runs $34. 2 people don't use $91 of water. 3. In week 5, the mail Tessa was supposedly bringing in stopped showing up in the stack she'd leave on the kitchen table for me. There wasn't any stack. There wasn't any mail. I filed all 3 of those in the place where I file things I don't have the energy to look at. Anybody who works nights knows that drawer. It's not that you don't see. It's that you set it down to pick up something heavier, and then you never go back for it. Here's the timeline, because it matters, and because I've told this story enough times to know the first thing people do is try to catch me in a mistake. Tuesday, October 14th. Census dropped at Ashley Crossing, and they cut 4 contracts, mine included, with 48 hours notice. Standard. Nobody was ugly about it. Wednesday night into Thursday, I worked my last shift, 7 to 7. Thursday, October 16th, 7:20 in the morning, I clocked out. I slept until 4 in the afternoon in a corporate apartment that smelled like carpet shampoo. Thursday, 6:12 in the evening. I texted Calvin. Contract got cut. Coming home tomorrow. 4 days early. Don't clean up. I just want my own bed. He answered at 11:58 that night. 5 hours and 46 minutes later. 3 words and a period. Okay. Drive safe. I read it standing at the window of that apartment with a paper plate in my other hand. I read it twice, not because it was hard to understand, because of how flat it sat. Like a phone ringing in an empty house. Not wrong exactly, just empty in a way that made the back of my neck cool off. I called Aunt Winnie Friday morning to tell her I'd swing by Saturday. She said, "Come see me when you're ready and not before." Then she said, "Odessa, you sound like you're bracing." I told her I was just tired. She let 3 whole seconds go by on the line. Aunt Winnie's silences have teeth. Friday, October 17th. I packed the car at 10. I stopped in Ridgeland for gas and a sweet tea. I turned onto Habersham a little after 4 in the afternoon with the windows down because the heat had finally broken, and Savannah in October smells like river and cut grass and somebody's charcoal. The first thing I saw was the cars, both sides of the street, bumper to bumper, a Suburban half up on my curb strip. The second thing I saw was the tent. A white catering tent in my side yard with a table under it and a woman in a black apron arranging little cups. The third thing was the string of bulb lights running from the porch column to the magnolia. Somebody had put a screw eye into that tree. Into my grandmother's tree. I parked 4 houses down behind a landscaping trailer, and I walked up on the sidewalk under the live oaks like a stranger. Nobody looked at me. Why would they? I was a woman in scrubs, with a badge on her bag coming home from work. There were 40-some chairs. There was a photographer crouched in the flower bed, my grandmother edged with bottle glass in 1974. There was music coming out of a speaker on the porch rail, and there was Calvin on the top step, in a linen jacket the color of oatmeal, and there was my sister beside him, and he had just said something, and everybody had just laughed, and she lifted her left hand up over her head like a boxer. The ring caught the 4 o'clock light, old European cut, a yellow gold band worn thin on one side from 52 years of a woman's hand. I have looked at that ring since I was old enough to look at anything. I stood at the end of my own driveway. I want to tell you I felt rage. What I felt was the specific stillness I feel when a monitor alarms and everybody else in the room turns to me. Everything got very quiet and very slow and very organized. Time did that thing where it lays itself out flat so you can walk down it. 40 seconds, give or take. I looked at the tent and thought, that's a caterer. Caterers take deposits. Deposits get paid weeks ahead. I looked at the chairs and thought, that's a rental. Rentals get delivered. Delivered means somebody was standing in this yard on a Tuesday signing for it. I looked at the photographer and thought, that's a booking. I looked at the guests and I recognized 11 faces. My sister's roommate from college, Calvin's cousin. 2 women I have fed in my dining room. Not one of them was surprised to be there. That's when I understood that this was not something that happened to me while I was away. This was something that had been built while I was away, framed and squared and paid for. This was a construction project, and I had been the site. A man in a bow tie noticed me first. He was maybe 60, one of Calvin's people, and he had a plastic cup of something in his hand, and he saw a woman in navy scrubs standing on the driveway, and he did the thing people do. He smiled and started to raise the cup, and then he watched the smile fall right off my face, and he didn't finish the motion. He turned. 2 more people turned. It moved through those chairs like a wind through a field. Calvin found me last. He was mid-sentence. I watched the sentence stop in his mouth. Tessa's hand came down slowly, and she closed it, and she put it behind her back. I walked up the middle of the grass, between the chairs, on the aisle they had made in my yard, and I stopped at the bottom of the steps, and I looked up at both of them. Nobody said one word. The speaker on the rail kept playing. Calvin came down 2 steps with his palms out. I know that posture. I've seen it from family members at 2 in the morning when I tell them the numbers aren't going the right way. Odessa. Baby. Okay. I need you to breathe for 1 second, because I know exactly what this looks like, and I have been trying to find the right way to talk to you about this for, listen, This is not. Nobody planned for you to." He stopped himself. "But I heard it. Everybody in that yard heard it. Nobody planned for you to." Something in me lifted its head. I felt my right hand find the porch rail, and I felt my fingers close on it, and I will be honest with you, because I promised I would be. For about 2 seconds, I saw myself walk up under that tent and take the corner of that table and put every cup and every tray and every little quiche onto the grass. I saw it in full color. I felt what it would cost, and I decided it was cheap and I wanted it. Then I looked past Calvin's shoulder at the magnolia and the screw eye somebody had driven into it, and I thought about a woman pressing hair in her front room to buy this ground, and I let go of the rail. I did not raise my voice. I have never once had to raise my voice in a code. "Get every one of these people off my property." Calvin blinked. "Odessa, can we just, right now, Calvin?" Something reorganized itself behind his eyes, not shame. I've thought about it a long time, and shame isn't what it was. It was the look of a man discovering that the room he walked into is not the room he prepared for. He turned around. And then he made his mistake, which was to lift both hands to the crowd and say, in the voice of a host, "Y'all, we're just going to take a little pause." I took my phone out of my scrub pocket and I called 911. I gave them my address. I said there were approximately 45 people on my private property, that I was the sole owner of record, that I was standing in my own driveway, that they had been asked to leave and had not left, and that I was requesting officers. The dispatcher asked me if there were any weapons. I said, "No, ma'am." She asked me if I felt safe. I looked at my sister in her champagne dress with her hand behind her back, and something moved sideways in my chest, and I said, "I don't know how to answer that." They were there in 11 minutes, 2 officers, a young one and a woman about my age who had clearly done this before, though probably not exactly this. I stood on my grandmother's top step with the deed on my phone. I keep a photo of it. Has anybody else ever done that? And I showed her the name on it, and I showed her my driver's license with the same address, and she looked at the tent and the chairs and the photographer and the 200 white rose petals somebody had scattered on my walkway, and she said, "Ma'am, do you want them trespassed?" I said yes. It took 40 minutes. I stood at the kitchen window while it happened, on the inside of my own house, with the door locked behind me, and I watched. Not Calvin. The yard, the chairs going back into stacks, somebody's aunt looking for her purse under a seat. The caterer arguing with the officer, then giving up, then loading her table into a van. That specific silence of people who have just watched something they're going to be describing at church for the next 10 years. Tessa stood by the crepe myrtle in that dress with her arms wrapped around herself. She looked at the kitchen window twice. I didn't move an inch. I let her see me standing there. When it was empty, I went out and I took the screw eye out of my grandmother's tree with a pair of pliers, and the tree bled a little sap over my knuckles, and I stood there in the dark, holding that little brass hook in my palm. That's when I remembered the mail. The box on the porch column was crammed so full the lid wouldn't shut. 6 weeks of it. Circulars, a jury summons, the water bill, and underneath all of it, a windowed envelope from a company called Coastal Line Lending, addressed to me at my address, and inside it a payment coupon book. Loan number. Origination date, September 22nd. Principal balance, $68,000. First payment, due November 1st, $457.11. On a house that has not had a mortgage since 1981. I sat down on the top step in my scrubs with a coupon book in my hands and the smell of somebody's leftover catering in the air, and I did not cry. I want to be careful here, because I know how that sounds. It wasn't strength. It was that the part of me that cries had already gone to sleep, and the part of me that works had come on shift. There was a knock at the kitchen door at 9:40 that night. Soft. 2 knuckles. Curtis Doyle was standing on my back step with a manila folder held in front of him with both hands, the way a man holds something when he doesn't know what else to do with his hands. I've known Curtis 11 years. He plays cards with Calvin. He's a notary. In Georgia, a notary commission is a small thing you get from the clerk of Superior Court, and it costs about $50. And it means that when you press a seal into a piece of paper, you are swearing to the state of Georgia that the person who signed it stood in front of you and proved who they were. He said, "Odessa, I need to explain something to you before somebody else does." I opened the door and I did not offer him a chair. He put the folder on my grandmother's kitchen table. Inside, it was a power of attorney. Limited, durable, executed the 4th of September. It gave Calvin Rhodes authority to act on my behalf in matters concerning the real property at my address. My name was at the bottom. My name, written by somebody who had never once watched me write it. My grandmother taught me to put a long tail on the O like a ribbon, and this O sat there closed up like a coin. Curtis's seal was pressed into the paper beside it. His signature, his commission number. He said Calvin told him I was in Charleston. He said Calvin had a copy of my license and I'd signed it already, and I'd sent it with him, and it was just a formality. He said I didn't read it close. He said, "He's my boy Odessa." He was crying by the end of it. A grown man in my kitchen, crying about a $50 commission. I said, "You didn't read it close." He said no. I said, "My grandmother worked nights in an office building for 11 years to buy this floor you're standing on." He didn't say anything. I said, "You can go now, Curtis. 2 things I want to say about that night. The first is that I slept 4 hours hard without dreaming, and I have never been able to explain that to anybody. The second is that at some point around 2 in the morning, I woke up and put the coupon book in a Ziploc bag. And then I went through the house and photographed every room, and then I took the Sucrets tin down off the shelf above the stove, and it was empty except for a hairpin. Monday morning, I sat in the office of an attorney named Harriet Voss on Bay Street. Real estate and fiduciary litigation. She was recommended by a charge nurse whose divorce she'd handled, and she had white hair cut close to her head and a habit of not filling silences. I put everything on her desk. The coupon book, the photographs, the power of attorney Curtis Doyle left in my kitchen. Harriet Voss doesn't summarize. She builds. She lays one brick and then another, and she does not tell you what the wall looks like until you can see it yourself. It took her 9 days. She called me in on a Wednesday. I sat down across from her and she turned her laptop around to face me. "2 signatures on this file, Miss Odessa," she said. "Only one of them is yours. Here's what was on that screen." On the 4th of September, 3 days before I drove to Charleston, while I was in that house, sleeping in my own bed, packing my scrubs into a duffel bag, a limited power of attorney was executed with a forged signature and a real notary seal. On the 22nd of September, Calvin Rhodes, acting under that document, closed a cash-out refinance on my grandmother's house with Coastal Line Lending. $68,000 against the equity. The appraisal was done on a Tuesday afternoon while I was 2 hours away asleep in a corporate apartment. Somebody let the appraiser in. Somebody walked him through the kitchen. The wire went into a joint checking account at a credit union out on Abercorn. 2 names on that account, Calvin's and my sister's. Harriet scrolled. $16,000 of it to a broker in Pooler as a down payment on a commercial lease. $9,000 to a car. $6,000 to a jeweler on Broughton. I sat very still when I saw that one, because I already knew the ring in that photograph had been sitting in my kitchen for free, and it took me a second to understand that the $6,000 was for a second ring, for himself, a men's band. And something about that turned my stomach in a way the $68,000 hadn't. $3,140 to a catering company on Bull Street. Deposit paid the 11th of August. August 11th. I signed my Charleston contract on August 5th. They didn't schedule that party around my absence. They scheduled my absence around the party. Every conversation I'd had at that kitchen table in August about the roof, about the money, about whether 6 weeks was too long, Calvin sitting across from me saying, "Baby, do what's best for you, I'll hold it down." Every one of those conversations, he already had a deposit down. And there was more. A credit card, opened online in June, in my name, using my social security number, with my sister listed as an authorized user. $4,317 on it. Bar tabs. A hotel in Atlanta over Memorial Day weekend, when Tessa told me she was at a continuing ed course in Macon. And $900 of that card was the balance on the catering. He threw an engagement party for another woman with my credit, on my grass, under a tree my grandmother planted, and he put a screw in it to hang the lights. Harriet let me sit with it. Then she said quietly, "Miss Odessa, I want you to understand something. This house was never the target. This house was the collateral. You were the credit." I asked her how long they'd been together. She turned the laptop back around and pulled up the lease on that credit union account and the hotel folio and a renter's insurance policy Calvin took out in February. And she said, "I can document 14 months. I would not be surprised if it's longer." 14 months. Which means that 8 months after I wrote him a check for $9,000, and 4 months after I sat in a hospital waiting room in a plastic chair, holding my sister's hand while they set her wrist, the two of them had a joint policy. I want to tell you about the phone call, because people ask. Georgia is a one-party consent state. That means only one person on a call has to know it's being recorded. I was that person. I called Tessa on a Sunday afternoon from my grandmother's kitchen table with a legal pad in front of me and Harriet Voss's questions written out in order. Harriet did not tell me to do it. Harriet told me not to. I did it anyway, and she has since told 2 other clients about it, so make of that what you will. Tessa picked up on the second ring and started crying immediately. I let her go for a long time. She said she never meant for it to happen. She said it just grew. She said Calvin was going through something. She said she'd wanted to tell me 100 times. She'd picked up the phone. She'd driven to the hospital parking lot once and sat there. I asked her about the 4th of September. She said she didn't know anything about any paperwork. I asked her who let the appraiser in on the 16th. She stopped crying. I said it again. "Who let him in, Tessa?" And here is what my sister said to me, in a flat, exhausted, almost irritated voice, like a woman who has been holding a door shut for months and has decided to just let it swing. "You weren't supposed to be standing there, Odessa. That's all. You had 4 more days. Everything was going to be handled by the time you got back. Not I'm sorry I did this to you. Not close. What she was sorry about was the logistics." Then she said the thing that I still hear. "You were never mean to me. That was the worst part. You just kept being fine. You bought me things and you never asked for anything, and I could never once tell whether you actually loved me or you just liked how it looked." 11 minutes and 3 seconds. I saved the file. I emailed it to Harriet Voss without a note. Her reply came in 6 minutes. "Come in Tuesday. Bring your driver's license." We filed the police report on a Tuesday afternoon at the Savannah Police Department on Habersham, 11 blocks from my house, which I found almost funny. The detective was a woman named Alvarado, who had a coffee ring on her desk calendar and the manner of somebody who has heard every version of a story and is only interested in the part that's actionable. She read the affidavit of forgery. She looked at the power of attorney, at Curtis Doyle's seal, at the closing statement, at the wire. Forgery in the 1st degree in Georgia is a felony. So is identity fraud. The notarization made it worse, not better, for both of them. She said, "Ma'am, this is a clean file." I signed at the bottom. Odessa, with the long tail on the O like a ribbon, the way my grandmother taught me at that Samchin table when I was 6 years old. Let me tell you what that felt like. It didn't feel like winning. It felt like setting a weight down on the correct side of a scale that had been tilted so long I'd stopped noticing I was standing crooked. Harriet ran 2 tracks. The criminal case belonged to the county and did not require anything from me but truth. The civil side she ran like a woman clearing a table. She sent the fraud affidavit to Coastal Line Lending's fraud unit and to the title company and to the underwriter. Within 3 weeks, their counsel called her. A forged, notarized POA is a bad day for a lender because it means their lien attached to nothing. They wanted it gone as badly as I did. The loan was rescinded and the security deed released, and my house went back to being a house instead of a hostage. But I want to be very clear because I have heard people tell versions of this where the woman just gets her house back and forgives everybody and puts on a nice dress. That is not what happened. Harriet sent Calvin a demand letter. 30 days. It was itemized. I asked her to itemize because I am a nurse and we chart. $68,000, cash out proceeds. $4,317, the credit card in my name. $9,000, the licensing bond that was never a bond. $2,850, Harriet's retainer. $1,140, the credit repair service and the fraud monitoring I now pay for and will be paying for. $600, an arborist who came out and looked at the wound in the magnolia and told me it would scar and live. $85,907. He countered. Of course he countered. He offered $40 and a letter of apology, and Harriet Voss read that email to me over the phone in the same tone she'd used to read the weather. I said no. He signed a confession of judgment on the 9th of December. If the money didn't come, Harriet could take it out of anything he ever owned or earned, and he would carry it into every job and every apartment application for the rest of his working life. The check came on day 29. Cashier's check, exact amount, no note. Harriet had warned me he'd wait until the last hour just to hold something back, and he did. It came at 5 on a Thursday. I drove to the credit union on Bull Street, the same one where my grandmother's deed sat in a box. I endorsed the back of it. I slid it across the counter to a teller who processed it with the exact mild efficiency she'd use for a Christmas Club deposit, and she slid me a receipt, and I folded it in half and put it in my bag and walked out into a parking lot at 5:30 on a December evening in Savannah. That was all. No ceremony. A number moved out of his account and into mine, where it had always belonged. Curtis Doyle lost his commission in February. The clerk of Superior Court revoked it, and the state has him on a list. And there is a civil action against him from the title company's insurer that I have nothing to do with and do not follow. He called me twice. The first time I let it ring. The second time I picked up and he started in on how his wife had left and how he'd known me 11 years and how he had a granddaughter starting kindergarten. I said, "Curtis, did you read it close?" He said no. I said, "Then we don't have anything to talk about." And I hung up, and I did not feel one thing about it. And I checked because I wanted to know if I was the kind of person who would. I met Tessa once, in January. I want to be precise about why, because it wasn't to punish her and it wasn't for the last word, although some mornings I'll admit that line is thinner than I'd like. I met her because there was one sentence I needed to say to her face, out loud, and then I needed to be finished. I picked a coffee place near the hospital, a place where nobody knew her and everybody knew me. Neutral ground, on my terms. I got there 20 minutes early and took the corner table with my back to the wall, the way you do in a trauma bay. She came in looking tired, not dramatically. The particular tired of a woman who hasn't slept clean in a while. She was wearing a coat I bought her. She sat down and put both hands around a cup she never drank from, and she said she'd been in therapy since November, and she said the word narcissist about Calvin 4 times in 6 minutes. And she told me he'd moved to Jacksonville, and she told me she'd given the ring to Harriet Voss's office, which I already knew because it had been sitting in my kitchen since December 7th in the same sucrose tin. Then she said, "Are you ever going to be able to forgive me?" And I looked at my little sister, who I raised, who I put through school, who slept in my bed for 11 nights after our mother died because she couldn't stand the sound of her own room. I said, "Tessa, you told me the worst part was that I was never mean to you, that you couldn't tell if I loved you or if I just liked how it looked." She started to answer. I put my hand flat on the table, and she stopped. "Grandma left me a house," I said. "She left me a roof and 4 walls and a tree. Everything else you ever got from me, I gave you. The tuition, the apartment, the alternator, the 900 lunches. I gave it to you because I loved you and because there wasn't anybody else to do it, and I never once sent you a bill." I picked up my keys. "You spent 12 years measuring yourself against me. You never told me. And you took the one thing that wasn't mine to give, because it wasn't mine, Tessa, it was hers. And you put it on your hand and you held it up in her yard for 40 people to see." I stood up. "I don't need you to be sorry. I need you to understand what I'm about to say, and then I need you to stop calling." She looked up at me. "I would have given you the ring. I have replayed the walk to my car more times than I care to admit. She didn't follow me. She didn't call. The tent left ruts in the side yard. It took until March for the grass to close over them. I replaced the deadbolt myself in November, with a screwdriver and a chisel and a YouTube video. I paused 11 times. It's a good lock. It cost $62 and it took me 2 hours, and I bled a little on the strike plate. There are 3 keys. One is on my ring. One is at Harriet Voss's office. One is in a drawer at Aunt Winnie's, in the yard she calls the yard, at the place off Skidaway. The magnolia has a scar about the size of a nickel, 4 feet up, on the north side. The arborist was right. It closed over and it kept going. It bloomed in April like nothing had ever been driven into it. I got the roof done in the spring with money that was mine twice over. I sat on the front steps in a lawn chair for 2 days, watching men I paid walk around up there, and I thought about my grandmother's 4 words on that manila envelope, and I laughed out loud once, alone on my own porch, in a way that probably concerned Mrs. Petitjean. Here's the thing nobody tells you about taking a place back. It does not feel like victory. It feels like yours. It's quieter than victory. It sits lower in the chest, and it lasts longer. I heard Calvin got picked up in Jacksonville in June, not from anybody who meant it as news. A woman I work with mentioned it sideways while we were restocking a crash cart, the way you mention weather. I said, I asked her about her son's baseball. I moved us along. I waited to feel something on the drive home, and I never did. Just clean, empty space where those 2 used to take up room. I have decided that's exactly the right amount. Aunt Winnie asked me, that first Saturday after everything, sitting in the courtyard with a plate of shortbread between us, "How are your kids doing?" I said, "One of them coded Thursday and we got him back." She patted my hand and said, "Good. Now tell me about the other business." I told her. All of it. Every number. When I finished, she looked out at the crepe myrtles for a while, and then she said, "Eunice cleaned an office building for 11 years. She said it like it explained something, and it did. There's a respiratory therapist at Marsh Point. I've worked beside him for 6 years and never once looked at him. His name is Wendell, and he's quiet in a way that isn't withholding, just comfortable in a room without talking, which is rarer than people think. Aunt Winnie mentioned him twice. In that offhand way, she mentions things she has clearly thought hard about. I let it sit for a month. We had dinner in May at a place on the river. He said something halfway through about a patient's family that made me laugh so hard I had to put my fork down. The real kind. The kind that gets away from you. I drove home that night and I didn't measure him against anything. I didn't run the numbers. It's a Tuesday in October now. A year. Almost exactly. I'm sitting at my grandmother's kitchen table with a glass of sweet tea, sweating a ring onto the wood, the way she'd have hollered at me for, and the back door open because the heat finally broke. The Sucrets tin is up on the shelf above the stove. The ring's inside it. Some days I think I'll wear it, and some days I think it's happier in the dark. I have a house with no lien on it, a roof that's tight, a lock I set myself, a scar on a tree that bloomed anyway, and a receipt folded in half in a drawer. You can inherit a house. Nobody can leave you the spine it takes to keep it. I picked up my glass. I looked out at the yard where they put the chairs. And then I got up and washed the dish in the sink, and dried it, and put it away where it goes.